Hey there, this is Dr. Joel Gould, and you're listening to my archive podcast called Get Your Smile On. This is a podcast that I recorded in 2015, and there's some really great information that I'm looking forward to updating with my new podcast called Revolution Radio. Stay tuned.
All right, everybody, welcome to Get Your Smile On. This is your wellness dentist, Dr. Joel Gould, here with another episode of Get Your Smile On. We are broadcasting live from beautiful Manhattan Beach, California. Tonight we are on early. We usually go on at 7 p.m. We are on at 5 p.m. for several different reasons. Most importantly, my guest tonight is Dr. Stasha Gominak. Dr. Gominak, are you out there?
Here. Thank you for inviting me.
You there? Oh, my pleasure. Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties. Broadcasting and computers, there are some issues when you go live, but I think we're all good. So usually I start off the show and talk about what the topic is, and you and I talked about what I wanted to call this episode, and I thought the idea of calling it Escape Permanent Winter would be a pretty good one. So before we get into that, I would love you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, your education, and where you're at now.
Joel, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in your podcast. I am a neurologist. I practice in Tyler, Texas. I'm originally from California. I went to college at UC Santa Barbara and then did medical school in Texas. So I'm actually very happy in both California and Texas. And currently I'm mostly interested in improving my patients' sleep. So I've practiced for 30 years, and I have a general neurology practice. And because of a couple of unusual accidental discoveries, I'm now able to improve my patients' sleep, and that's what interests me the most, and that's why we're having this discussion today.
Okay, fantastic. So initially, I became aware of you when I found out. So for myself, having a wellness dentistry podcast, I sort of on my first podcast I define what that means, but anything related to health. And after 25 years in dentistry, I was having some personal physical problems that had to do with my sleep. I have sleep apnea, and I found out also that I'm terribly vitamin D deficient. Initially you came to me by way of my sleep apnea research, and I saw one of your first lectures on YouTube, 2013, where you started to talk about vitamin D and a whole bunch of different things. So I guess we want to just cut right to the chase here, and let's talk about vitamin D. We talked in past shows that vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's actually a hormone. And what I want to talk to you about, if you want to maybe sort of briefly describe how you came upon the whole D issue.
I would say that most of the things we're going to talk about tonight are accidental occurrences in my practice that then I try to figure out an explanation for. So what happened to me was I had 5 years of doing sleep studies in young, healthy women who came to see me for headaches, and most of them did not have sleep apnea. Most of them just did not have enough rapid eye movement sleep, and many of them just couldn't sleep, and many of them were so sleep deprived that there was no point in even doing a sleep study. They could tell me they didn't sleep at all. So I had a population that was very different than the group of patients who had been originally described, which were overweight males after heart surgery who stopped breathing in the ICU when they were sitting bolt upright. Because I had a group of patients who had much milder disease, they provided me with a lot of challenges. For instance, if you don't have sleep apnea, what do you do to help them? If they sleep for many hours but don't get into deeper phases of sleep, what should I do to help them? And ultimately, there are no medicines that actually replicate normal sleep. There are things that coax us into sleep and to some extent copy the light sleep, but nothing that really gets us into deep sleep. So I was left with a lot of frustration, a lot of patients who I felt I could probably make them better if I could make their sleep better. And mostly my question was, why is it that everyone I do a sleep study on, and now I've stopped doing them just on my headache patients, and I'm doing them on anybody who comes in and will let me do a sleep study, and I wind up doing sleep studies on 8-year-olds and 88-year-olds, and they're all abnormal. And to me that was shocking, number one, and number two, very upsetting because I had very little to offer. I had sleeping pills and I had CPAP masks, pressure masks that you strap on your face, which are obviously not normal. It's what we had, but it really won't help someone who doesn't stop breathing. All that mask does is push air in to try to keep the airway open. So about 5 years into doing all these sleep studies, I had a young 18-year-old who had a sleep study that showed she was in light sleep, which means she was sleeping, but she wasn't getting into the phases where she made repairs to her body. She was sleeping for 10 hours, but no deep sleep was recorded. And that was, one, shocking, and she was otherwise a normal 18-year-old, and she wound up having a B12 deficiency. And the only reason why I tested that was because she asked me what she should do now that she was so tired. And I really just said, well, do those tired labs. And I really had no idea what they were, and she turned out to have a B12 that was very, very, very low. Because her sleep study was so abnormal and because the B12 was so low, for the first time I began to think about, gee, wouldn't this be an exciting idea that we could give back a vitamin, which would be a raw material that these cells in the brainstem need in order to make the transitions into deeper sleep. So this would be something we could give the patient back again, and they might sleep normally. That was just like a totally foreign idea. And I began to measure B12 levels on my patients. And soon after that, one of my patients mentioned vitamin D and that her doctor had measured her vitamin D, gave her vitamin D, her wrist pain got better. And because I was already drawing blood, I threw in the vitamin D level, not really being that interested in it, thinking it had to do with bone pain because I was as misinformed as everyone else. And then over a period of about 4 months, I began to realize that every single person I did a vitamin D level on, it was low. And then by complete accident, I happened to give a low dose, but in two patients who were wearing CPAP masks successfully, who had pretty high D levels, and they got better. And they came back and said, gee, this CPAP mask didn't really do anything for me. It did not take my headaches away. But that little message you sent me about the vitamin D, it made my sleep better within about 3 weeks. And 2 people came back in a week and told me that. And then after that, very few other people got better. And then there was a long process of trying to figure out why these 2 guys got better, why is it that the dosing is so wrong. And then after that, there's a huge body of literature that shows that vitamin D affects the parts of the brainstem that fascinate me about the control of keeping the airway open and keeping the timing of sleep correct. So there was a linkage in the literature, scientific literature, that was well documented that it apparently had been completely ignored because it was already there, but no one had written about sleep and why it would be within this bigger picture of what vitamin does for us as an endocrine hormone.
Okay, so I want to interrupt you there for a couple of reasons. First of all, so that's an incredible linking of sleep and vitamin D, but I want to just sort of let my listeners understand what's so important about sleep. And I know this is tough because this is a shorter interview here, but I would love you to tell from a neurologist's point of view what sleep is, what's so important about it, and I know this is a tough one because I'll get you to sort of get you to explain how this sort of comes out in the long run. But if you want to just generally talk about sleep, and then towards the end of what sleep does, then we can talk about the release of hormones, because I think that where I'm seeing a lot of my patients who actually have sleep disorders is that the biggest issue is they're not necessarily understanding that the control of their entire bodies and the repair is so related to sleep. So, I'm just sort of, I guess we'll call it the elevator pitch on why sleep's so important and what happens when we don't have it.
Okay. That's a very, very good question, Joel. And I have to tell you that the first part of this is to understand that humans are here, animals are here, living things are here on the planet with no user's manual. That's a very different concept than the way I present myself as a physician. I walk in the room, I have a white coat on, I try to present myself as being all-knowing, But in actual fact, medicine is an observation, and therefore it's always changing. Our interpretation of it is always changing. What I'm going to tell you about my interpretation of what we do in sleep is based on, for 10 years, listening to people who don't sleep normally and then putting it together. So in my view, the body is being used up for 18 hours. And then we lay down and we repair, we make every chemical we need, we make little packets of each chemical, insulin, serotonin, dopamine, our own Xanax-like chemicals. We make little packets with those chemicals and we store them in the cell so that after 8 hours of sleeping, we can wake up and we have all the chemicals we need to be awake for another 16 or 18 hours. That is not the way we are told about sleep, because currently sleep is, the best anybody says about sleep is we really don't know what it's for. Well, from my point of view, I know what it's for. We either use the body up or we repair it. If we don't repair it and we don't make the chemicals we need, we all feel terrible. And my practice is filled with people who have not slept normally for 2, 5, 10, 30 years. And then I watch what happens to them if they don't go into the reparative phases of sleep. So in retrospect, my view of it is, all the repair mechanisms that we've described in medicine, whether it's how does the pancreas make enough insulin to last the whole day, how does my GI tract work, how does it repair itself, how do nerves repair themselves, everything that I've read about how we repair the body probably only happens while we're sleeping. And there's a very, very important reason for that. When you open up certain proteins in each cell that enable a cell to repair itself, so it has to make repair chemicals, and it has to make proteins, and it has to build things within that cell. In order to build itself again, you actually have to open up processes that would allow the cell to actually, if it were not tightly supervised, if the brain weren't paying complete attention to that process, if you let it go a little unsupervised, that cell could decide it not only wanted to repair itself, but it wanted to grow an entire human being. That means these repair processes open up the potential for growth and then cancer and things that would go haywire every single night. So I think the entire brain is extremely involved in supervising every single piece of the body's repair. Every part of the brain has an assigned toenail, knee, internal organ that it is responsible for supervising the repair processes while we are sleeping. If you do not have that every night, the body begins to age faster than the people around you. This is now an epidemic, and most of our population is aging faster.
Right. Okay, so that brings up a couple of great points. So first of all, I just want to point out that when we talk about cancer, what we're talking about is a bunch of cells that aren't supposed to be growing in the right location that start to grow. That's a basic description of it. So the sleep actually helps our immune system to protect us from those type of issues by taking care of our white blood cells and so is the connection with the vitamin D as well as the repair mechanism for our chromosomes, is that related to, do you think that's highly related to sleep?
One of the very confusing parts,
or is that a coincidence? Yeah.
No, they're absolutely related. The hardest part about vitamin D is it is active on multiple levels. So if you open a textbook or if you look in the internet and you ask what is the mechanism of vitamin D, you will actually see that vitamin D and A and several other things are pivotal to going into the nucleus of the cell, the actual DNA protective mechanism that keeps the DNA coiled and quiet until we need it, is opened. The A and D and several other cofactors sit on the actual chromosomes, and help to express certain proteins. So that's one mechanism. But it turns out that vitamin D has multiple layers of mechanisms. It's a single chemical that actually does something different for a red blood cell than it does a brain cell, and that there are vitamin D receptors in certain cells in the brainstem where the vitamin D probably has a slightly different effect than this expression of proteins. Okay. That means that vitamin D is affecting the body in multiple different ways, which is one of the reasons why it's such a confusing literature. The thing that I feel is different about my viewpoint is I went into this literature asking, is this possibly why the entire planet stopped sleeping normally when electricity arrived 50 years ago?
Right.
So the question that I posed was different.
Okay. So this is probably a perfect opportunity just to get back to the D. So the basic story, we'll finish up with the sleep. So without proper sleep, our bodies basically go into dysfunction, and it can affect anyone differently. And part of what you're saying also is that for people who are getting terrible sleep, that if they have a genetic predisposition to a certain type of disease, that because their bodies aren't healthy, that disease is going to get expressed. And we'll give the easiest example is that I have Crohn's disease, and that we talked that I probably had a vitamin D deficiency my entire life since I grew up in Canada, and it's pretty dark up there, and I didn't eat much other than probably candies and cookies. So my ability to fight it off, or my ability for my intestines and my whole systems to work properly, were interrupted by having low vitamin D, and in my case also sleep issues as well, that were probably related.
Yes.
Okay.
They are related.
So
I like what you said about one of the difficult parts is that when you take someone's sleep away, they only manifest the diseases they have a genetic predilection for. That means you can't think of it as, oh, we're going to make you not sleep and then everybody will get the same thing. They don't. They'll get things that run in their family. And that's kind of complicated.
Well, okay, so I think that this is both the most complex thing in the world and also the most simple. And so going back to the whole story is that we talked about, so if we're chronically vitamin D deficient as a population, and we've talked in a previous podcast episode about how the farther you get away from the 30th parallel, the more disease that you have, as probably related to vitamin D. So what you have done is you've recommended supplementing people's vitamin D until they get up to what we would consider an evolutionary level, as if we actually lived outside. And so let's just talk about, the vitamin D, because it's a hormone, it has to be calibrated or titrated, as we say in the medical field. So you had recommended to your patients a zone to be in. What is that zone?
The zone is 60 to 80, and that's a blood measurement. And that grows out of asking more than 2,000 people, how do you feel? How's your sleep? And there has been no single article before our published article that asked that question. And it has been very consistent now over 5 years that when you ask a patient how they feel once their vitamin D crosses 60, their sleep is different. And almost everyone at the beginning can tell the difference in how they feel. So between 60 and 80, the patient's sleep is good. And within the first year, probably at least 3/4 of the patients will be able to recognize when their sleep changes if their vitamin D goes too high or too low.
Okay, so I just want to break in there and say, so, for the average person, I went to my doctor and I said, hey, I'm turning a certain age and I want to get whatever tests I need to get done. And I specifically asked about my vitamin D, and what was interesting is that he said, your vitamin D is normal, you're great. And I asked him, what is normal? And he said, you're 20. And now I had already been taking vitamin D supplements at that point in time. So that was me with taking some supplements. Now, so we're talking that the ideal would probably be somewhere between 60 to 80.
So that means you were really badly off.
Yes. Well, not only that, but the most important part of that is that my doctor, he's a good guy, but he's basing what he's telling me on what he sees out there in the literature, and he says, no, your D's fine. He thinks that's okay. So the take-home message for me is that not only do we have a problem that we're deficient of vitamin D, but we have a medical industry that it doesn't necessarily know what to tell you. And when I ask my patients and I say, tell me about your vitamin D, and they say, oh, no, I'm fine. I take supplements. And I say, what are you taking? Well, I take 1,000 international units. So everyone has a very unusual idea of what good D is and what their D is supposed to be. But this is seemingly one of the most critical things that in the current modern health. We talked about okay. So I'm going to go on just a bit here. So we talked about the whole idea that these are modern sicknesses. These are the restless leg syndrome, the fibromyalgia, migraine, stuff that you're seeing on a regular basis. We didn't see this 40 years ago or 50 years ago, did we?
I don't think that they were epidemic 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, and the way I present this to my patients, because I got so paranoid at the beginning of this, because every week I would come up with something else that was linked to vitamin D deficiency, and not only would my patients think that's weird, I think it's weird. And so I kept thinking there's no way that all of these things can be linked to vitamin D deficiency. But they are. And so what I came up with as an explanation was, I don't have a drug to give you to keep that hand from growing out of your chest. Well, I don't see any patients come in the office with a hand growing out of their chest. I don't have any patients like that. Therefore, the only thing that medicine really reacts to and makes up stories about is what walks in the door. Now, the other thing my office isn't filled with are patients with syphilis, patients with diphtheria, patients with tuberculosis, patients with polio. Patients that would have filled my office in 1910, we have actually cured those illnesses. So what I actually am observing is this patient population who I'm sitting there, they make appointments, they walk in, and I ask them what's bothering them, and there's a whole list. And then over the last 50 years, we think that list is, quote, unquote, normal because it's so common. So I realized in about the third month of reading about the vitamin D that I actually thought it was normal and laudable medicine, that the internist sending me a patient who's 40 years old who's on four pills, I thought that was good medicine. There's a little something for antidepressant, something for reflux. They're on a little something because their feet hurt or their back hurts, and, they're on something else for their allergies. And I realized that as a 40-year-old myself, when I was 40, I didn't take any pills. And not only that, I, as a 60-year-old, really don't want to take any pills. I really don't want to go see the doctor. That means there really is a weird assumption that I think it's normal that a human being at 40 years old should have daily headache, back pain, allergies, problems with their bowels, and reflux, and be pretty depressed and anxious. Yet I think that's normal because it is so common. And now I think of it in a different way, and I think, these are all the things that have resulted in the population because we missed something. We really did cure polio and diphtheria and syphilis, but we missed this one thing that is pivotal, and therefore the population that is around me, including me, is suffering from things that are all connected like spokes on a wheel to this one major hormone that we missed that turns out to run sleep. We have also left sleep for last because humans, doctors are human, we are unconscious during the time we're sleeping. We haven't really had a window into it. So the D and the sleep have been left for last.
Okay. So this is like the last frontier. And what's really funny is that, when I was sleeping, I would wake up every morning and feeling a certain way. And what I realized after getting my D up higher is that when you're used to crummy sleep, when you're used to the way you feel, it seems normal. So this is normal to a lot of people, how they feel. Okay, so this is a perfect opportunity to sort of discuss. So I kind of, the way I describe this is we took an incredible, highly evolved mammal, the human, and we put it into a beautiful, air-conditioned, gilded cage, and it's getting sick in the same way that when we take a whale and put it into captivity, it's going to get sick too, because it doesn't have the actual conditions that it grew up on, evolutionarily speaking. So
yes.
all these modern diseases, these are a result of taking this human animal out of its environment and putting it into a way more comfortable one. I don't want to go back to living in a cave, but boy, I feel completely different even 3-4 weeks into having myself treated for sleep apnea. I'm now getting full night's sleep, and I'm getting my vitamin D up, and just my feeling alone is pretty incredible. The issue that has come up is this sounds so wacky that it could just be something as simple as this, but it's kind of true.
Yeah.
So what do your colleagues think about this idea that maybe we don't have to give a pill for every single thing according to what the pharmaceutical companies, maybe want us to do? What do your colleagues think about what you're doing?
Joel, I think the way you presented that you became interested in this because you weren't feeling well, that is the pivotal place when I'm sitting. Number one, I've hit a wall with my colleagues, and now I don't even try to talk to them about it. But when someone doesn't feel well, and especially when they don't sleep, so when a physician doesn't sleep well, and they stumble on my literature, or they're sending me patients, and I send them information back, and what I'm doing with their patient is something that they wonder about their own health, they become very interested in it. But it really has to be through their own physical experience of not sleeping well. And those people are then invested in kind of breaking out of this idea that all of medicine has already been discovered. All of us who go to medical school, think that everything we learned there was the truth. Oddly, for the physicians, I'm 60, my physicians in my age group thought that fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and sleep apnea were really made-up diagnoses. A lot of us thought they were just totally created out of nothing because they weren't in our medical school classes. So, and because there hasn't really been a good firm pathophysiology, or how does sleep apnea really arise? How does fibromyalgia arise? Nobody really knows that. I think I do, but what's written about it is so unsatisfying to the patient and to the physicians that we've still kind of left those as, gee, I kind of believe in them, I kind of don't. As soon as you have non-restorative sleep yourself, there is a huge drive to try to figure that out. And you realize that your illness is related to that, and all of a sudden it becomes the most important thing you could possibly learn about. So my colleagues that are suffering from it are very motivated, and they will sit and listen. The ones that have missed that idea, or just last night I was out with other physicians, the guy who's wearing the CPAP mask and has never thought further past that, hasn't thought about the fact that, my cat doesn't wear a CPAP mask, neither do the squirrels. Nobody else is wearing a CPAP mask except human beings. Only doctors would come up with something that crazy. Yet, and what's interesting about that? I don't actually make fun of a patient who has to have their CPAP mask on. They've become addicted to it, yet I'm not derisive of them. That's a very interesting thing, because I'm derisive. All of medicine is derisive of the people who need sleeping pills, as though there's something badly wrong with them. There's something inherently weak about them. We don't treat people who use CPAP masks in the same way, yet we should.
Yeah. Well, okay, So it's so interesting. So the thing that I'm seeing here, I'm seeing two types of patients in my practice, which is interesting, is I'm seeing the female patient who's done everything and feels terrible. And when I come in and look in their mouth and I see all of the obvious signs to me of sleep apnea, because the signs in the mouth, they jump out at you if someone's been sick for a while. And they are so grateful and so interested. They can't wait to do a sleep study, and they can't believe that no one's ever suggested this before, because their sleep is terrible. And they admit it. And the The second thing is that kind of scares me is I've got plenty of patients who are already on a CPAP, and the way the medical system works is that once you get a CPAP, you're out the door, and nobody's checking on you. Now, I'm screening these patients with their CPAP machines, and I can tell you that a lot of them are not functional. They're not calibrated correctly. So I'm seeing all kinds of stuff that kind of scares me. And so the whole idea that you get diagnosed with sleep apnea, you get a CPAP machine, you're stuck with it your entire life, and no one ever checks you again, I think is crazy and ridiculous. But there is so many things that I've just discovered in the last little while that are actually crazy and ridiculous. This whole situation with sleep apnea, and again vitamin D. So I want to turn things just real quick. We talked about this is a tough one because it's really complex. What struck me when I heard you first speak is you said vitamins. I don't care about vitamins, and I thought the same thing. I'm interested in real stuff, and I think that vitamins are flaky and silly. But what I want to share with my listeners is the whole permanent winter idea that if our bodies are deficient of sleep and vitamin D, our bodies think that we're in a whole different time zone. We're hibernating. So I guess maybe this is going to be tough for you to explain, but if you could explain the whole vitamin D and why you need B vitamins as well. And first of all, I just want to take this opportunity to say that this show is for informational purposes. Do not go out and do anything crazy. Please consult with your physician or your dentist or me. Even email me before you do anything crazy. However, you can go out into the sun and get vitamin D safely if you know how to do it. So I'm not worried about that. But tell us about the difference between somebody who's D-deprived versus somebody who's got full D, and what's the difference between their digestive system and how they are as a human?
The first interesting part is that the linkage of vitamin D to multiple systems in the body and how it fits together to explain how every animal on the planet can put up with a winter and a summer was all summarized by a gentleman named Walter Stump, who was a steroid chemist. And he started publishing in the late 80s, and he has 20 years of articles that describe why we would have a hormone that we make on our skin that is, in humans, is absorbed through the skin. But in all other furry animals, so pigs and humans, absorb it through the skin. Probably reptiles do too, but mammals that are furry actually lick the vitamin D that's made in their fur, so it actually goes in orally, which is one of the confusing aspects. This is a hormone. We make it on our skin. We actually make it, but it can come in orally. And the first original mistake was made because we do most of our experimentation on rats, because rats are nocturnal. That means they have actually adapted a vitamin D receptor that can take a similar hormone. It's not the same, but it's similar. It's called D2. Unfortunately, it's still being given as a prescription, but D2 is made by a fungus that grows on grain. That means that we use these animals that could be kept in a cage inside as our model, missing the fact that 10 years later there was a similar but not identical chemical described on the skin of pigs that had been left in the sun. So Dr. Stump took all of this information, put it together, and made a beautiful explanation for, the reason why we have a hormone that is linked to our level of metabolism, i.e. it changes our thyroid hormone, it changes how much we eat. It is linked to whether or not we are in the mode to put on weight, just like bears. As bears reach the end of the season, they put on weight so that they can hibernate in the winter. They use the fat stores to get through the winter. Though that is run not voluntarily by the bear. The bear doesn't just decide it's going to lay in the ground. There are hormonal frameworks that cause that bear to actually go into a sleep mode that lasts for months on end. Humans do the same thing, run by the same set of hormones. We actually get up every 24 hours, but in the past, in order to survive long winters, periods of time when there would be no food for weeks on end were survivable because we would sleep for long periods, because we would actually use our fat stores in much the same way as a bear did. Now, because we are no longer thinking of ourselves in that way, medicine has missed the fact that there is a hormone that connects all of that. One of the fascinating things for me is the gastroenterology literature that has moved in the last 30 years that I've been interested in neurology. They've been studying what happens in the GI tract, and during the last 10 years where I've been studying sleep, they've been studying who are the bacteria that live in our colon. So there's a whole body of literature that talks about the fact that the wrong intestinal bacteria are epidemic throughout all the developed countries in the same patient populations that have sleep apnea. So there's a link in terms of the appearance of when this epidemic occurred and within the same populations. And there is multiple parts of the literature that substantiate the idea that many of the autoimmune diseases are patients who have the wrong bacteria in their colon. The cause and effect has not been clear. What happened to me was I'm interested in D, I'm not interested in poop, but it turns out, one of the things that doesn't get better when the D is perfect is the patients don't lose weight. They're still fat. I know that they gain weight because they were D deficient, but when I get the D perfect for 2 years, they still don't lose weight. Most of the patients who had irritable bowel at the end of 2 years, they have perfect D levels, their sleep's better, they still have irritable bowel. So that didn't get better. And there were 2 or 3 things that were left over at the end of 2 years. The third one was terrible pain. So many of my patients had gotten better, yet they still had back pain, leg pain, knee pain, joint pain, muscle pain, a lot of pain that was unexplained. And by weird accident, one of my patients walked in with a book on a B vitamin. I still had no interest in vitamins. I still really was just interested in vitamin D, but my patients were failing. There were still things that weren't fixed. And because she brought me this book, I happened to say, well, this is interesting. It's a B vitamin that's linked to pain. It's a B vitamin that makes joint pain go away. And, this B vitamin called pantothenic acid makes cortisol. That would link to all the joint pain that all my patients have that's unexplained. She says in this book that pantothenic acid is pivotal in sleep, and it makes the patient sleep better. And I think, wow, I like the idea, but why would the patients be B deficient? I'm still operating in the same mindset as everybody else. I eat well. I do what my doctor tells me. If you eat a good diet, you don't have to take B vitamins. I don't really like taking vitamins. I'm very self-conscious about giving them to my patients because so many of my colleagues think I'm a wacko now. But it leads down a road that happens to lead me to this B vitamin that turns out to be only probably made by our intestinal bacteria, which then becomes, this is weird. Here's a vitamin that's made by our intestinal bacteria, and all of us have the wrong ones, and we probably don't have any of that vitamin anymore. So it leads me into a second set of vitamins and another discovery, which is, golly, if the B vitamins are all made daily or have to be eaten daily and are peed out on that day and can't be stored, how does that bear lie in the ground for 6 months and not eat and not die? Well, because the bacteria that eat his colonic mucus that bear makes as their food supply lives inside him as the normal bacterial culture, which has always sustained that species for billions of years over multiple months. So those bacteria make the B vitamins. What that means is humans were never made to take vitamins. The humans were here, the animals were all here before the doctors came. The odd part is that we all are, in fact, vitamin deficient now. And it was a cascade, like a domino effect of the D. Turns out RD feeds the intestinal bacteria. They need RD to have a certain makeup of species. Those species that are high D summer species make us put our calories into muscle so we can plant 40 acres and actually be able to pick 40 acres of cotton in the summer. And in the winter, the population changes because there's a low D, and low D favors other bacteria that make us take the calories, the few calories we eat, and put it into fat. So you can watch all the epidemics forming in unison, the obesity, the sleep apnea, the colonic microbiome, and the chronic pain, all growing starting in the late 70s and becoming now epidemic. And it's not just the U.S. It's any country where air conditioning has arrived. The countries where they do not have electricity do not have these epidemics in the same amount.
Right. Okay. So I'm gonna stop you there. We're gonna take. I want to recap what you're saying here just before. We're gonna take a very short break for 1 second. We're gonna come right back, and I want to sort of review that. I want to give that point back to my listeners and make sure that I understand exactly what you're saying. So hang on for 1 quick second, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
All right. All right. Apparently, we are not going to be taking a break. Are you still there? Hello?
I'm still here.
Hello? Okay, well, we're going to continue on. So I'm not really sure what happened there. But so to recap, so what you're saying is as the sun gets lower in the sky, as humans, our intestinal bacteria started to change for winter. And instead of burning calories and building muscle, we started putting on fat to the point at which when I go to the gym and I see all these people who are trying to lose some weight, they're struggling to the best of their abilities, but their body would actually prefer to burn their muscle than give up the fat because their intestines say, winter's coming. And your intestine doesn't know that you're taking a flight to Hawaii and you want to look good in your bikini. Your body just says, if I lose this fat, I'm going to die. So I got to do everything in my power not to burn my fat. I'm going to burn the muscle before I burn fat.
That's correct.
All right. So when I say we're all stuck in permanent winter, basically because of our intestinal bacteria, the ones that should be producing vitamins that give us growth and strength, we're hanging on to the ones that cause us to store fats. And no matter how hard we try, I guess, and again, I see those people at the gym, and, now knowing what I know, I feel terrible. I want to say, hey, whoa, slow down. Because everything you're doing is right. Exercise is great, but you've got the wrong chemicals. You've got the wrong stuff going on. Yeah. No.
And they get hurt,
it's really...
and they feel worse, and they can't lose weight, and they get so discouraged. And they come in to see me, and I, as the physician, here's what I have to say to them. Your back hurts because you're fat. Your feet hurt because you're fat. Everything hurts because of you. You're doing it wrong.
It's all your fault. Yeah, it's all your fault.
I think that is the wrong message, and I think that's a very discouraging message, and I think that that's absolutely wrong. It's not their fault.
Well, okay. So we get to this weird thing about sleep apnea, and it's like a shame thing. I just wrote an article about sleep apnea, and I had to admit, I said, when I ask my patients, say, have you been tested for sleep apnea? They just say, oh, I don't have it. Like it's a defensive mechanism. Like I'm accusing them of being fat, and it's really terrible. So, I'm so glad that we sort of got to talk about this because to me, this is, just the whole idea that we're all running around with the absolute wrong intestinal bacteria to make us the way we want to be, which is healthy. I don't think my intestines know that there's a 24-hour Ralph's around the corner from where I live, that I don't need to have extra fat stored on me because I can just go down to In-N-Out Burger if I'm really desperate.
Yes.
So, all right. So it's such a basic point. Yeah.
Let me add one other thing that's really, really interesting. There are now really good articles that describe that these bacteria, when the winter bacterial population actually make these short-chain fatty acids, these little tiny chemicals that then go into our bloodstream, and they go up in our nose, and they hit these little receptors that makes us want high-calorie, high-fat, high-carbohydrate foods. It actually changes our appetite.
Right. Well, and then I guess that's the whole food industry is playing on that with our sweet and salty and all that stuff. It's pretty incredible stuff. So is this your concept of this? Does anyone else understand? Is this a school of thought anywhere that this is going on? Does anyone else thinking that this is good? To me, it's so simple that it makes absolute perfect sense. Is there a school of thought? Is there a group of doctors who are saying this is the way it is? Let's focus on this.
No. That's a short answer.
Fair enough.
I and Walter Stump wrote the first and only article hypothesizing the idea that vitamin D was linked to sleep apnea. There are multiple clinical trials ongoing, and there are clinical trials that substantiate that now that are prospective trials. I will be publishing soon the second part of this, which is it's not just it is the effect on the intestinal bacteria, and that you can correct the intestinal bacteria and get your intestinal bacteria back into the summer mode. But in order to do that, you have to give it lots of vitamin D and lots of Bs, all of the Bs together. That's a difficult concept, and it's a new idea. And what I've stepped into is there are about 5 new ideas that are linked together, and that means that it's very difficult for routine medical doctors to understand it. Yeah. The ones that are suffering, the doctors that are sick, see that they have many of these things occurring in their body. But at the moment, no one else is, I do have other doctors like you who have looked at this and said, wow, I want to do that. But you and I and Dr. Park are beginning that group of physicians.
Oh, well, okay. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay. So we're approaching the end of the show, and I want to review a few things for people because there's so many really important points going on here. So first of all, just before we leave that one point, so this is definitely something that I'm so interested in, and the idea that we can do this, we can change our physiology by just doing very simple stuff, it just blows my mind. So anybody out there listening, you probably at some point soon can come to my website and get a little more understanding of how this is done with more detail. I try to keep the show sort of more simple, just not to get too confusing. But so real quick, I just want to review. So basically our major issues are not getting enough sleep, because when we sleep, that's when our bodies repair everything. And from that, everything falls apart there. And the vitamin D is the critical piece of this, although it's much more complex. Would that be correct?
That's correct. And let me just add that the last several years that I'm doing this, I have become extremely respectful of these chemicals that I thought were trivial. So I think vitamins can kill you. Vitamins can give you terrible pain. Vitamins can be the actual reason why people wind up in the hospital with a stroke. Now, no one sees it that way but me, but that's because I'm thinking of the effect of the vitamin on the sleep. So, one, vitamins are only good for you if you need them. They are not good for you if you don't need them. And ultimately, all of us would like to go back to the state where, just like the bear, we had the right guys inside making all our bees, and we really don't need to take anything. We will all need to take some D because we do not live outside anymore. But we have to adjust that based where we are on the planet, how much we go outside this year as opposed to last year, how old we are. Every decade we make less D for the same amount of sun exposure. So even if you keep up the same habitual sun exposure every summer, you will inevitably become D deficient in your 60s and 70s. That means this was always linked to the things that we see in the aging population. It was a normal part of death of all animals. The sleep goes bad, they get constipated, they get a runny nose, and I got rheumatism, my back hurts when I wake up. Those were all things we saw in the elderly. Now they present in young people. But all of these things are correctable. When you use the sleep to correct every single thing that the brain has put off, what I see in my patients makes me think that the brain has a memory of the REM sleep and the slow wave sleep repair jobs that it put off over the last 20 years. It can actually go, if you leave a person alone and you just encourage them to sleep as much as they can and you get the chemistry right, the body knows what to do. And it will slowly over time correct all the things that have been left off. Now, I do think that there are certain people who walk into my office who are in the final stages of cancer where it's too late, but I don't think that's most of my population.
Wow.
And every single person who's ill in every way Even if you're in the final stages of cancer, you need the best sleep that anybody can give you. That's what you need. You need that and your doctor.
Well, there you go. Okay, so I'm gonna want to close the show on that note, is how important sleep is, and it just makes sense. You know, what did our grandparents tell us? Get a good night's sleep. How do you feel when you really got a bad night's sleep? You feel terrible. Being used to really crummy sleep isn't the same as having good quality sleep, and boy, I actually know the difference now. So first of all, I would love the right to get you back on the show to talk a little more specifically about some certain things we didn't even get to cover. This is such a fascinating topic, but I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm with you, and I hope we can just wake up the world and say, hey, not all of medicine is wrong, but let's focus on what we can improve without being crazy. Just be reasonable. So thank you so much, and I would love to have you back on the show again.
Thank you, Dr. Gould. I think you're just wonderful, and you're going in the right direction, and I'm happy to be a part of that movement. We're making our own movement towards not needing medicines and feeling good because we sleep well.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much. You have a great night and get some good sleep, and I know I will as well.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Get Your Smile On with Dr. Joel Gould, your wellness dentist. I'm so excited about all the future things that I'm working on for this podcast, and I can't wait for you all to hear about the incredible things that are really not out there. So until next time, get your smile on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.